All right. Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for making it out here this afternoon. My name is Linda Giftash. I am the marketing manager with the Vancouver Film Fest. Before we get started with our panel this afternoon, I just wanted to say thank you to some of our partners that have made this entire conference possible and making it enjoyable for all of you. So first of all, I'd like to thank our partners Hammer and Tong for the VR programming that they've been putting on the last few days. If you haven't done the Walk the Plank, or if you haven't tried painting sort of in the therapeutic VR session that they have out in the corner, I highly recommend it. It's a lot of fun. I haven't done the plank yet myself. I will. I keep promising them that I'll get to it, but I'll do that. But I did the painting yesterday, and it was a lot of fun. So I definitely recommend if you haven't tried that out yet. We are in the UBCP ACTRA Theatre today, so thank you to them for sponsoring this room. Without further ado, you may be familiar with our next host. He was a keynote earlier this afternoon. He's a Canadian writer and producer known for groundbreaking digital series Mortal Kombat Legacy, and recently wrote and produced 2 Dead Rising digital features. Produced the digital series Electroin and Dynagirl for Legendary Pictures and Full Screen. Please welcome Tim Carter.
Thanks very much. Welcome to the panel. Today we're going to talk about IP, I think, and we got 3 excellent speakers up here. I'm going to start by welcoming them and just very, very briefly introduce them. In fact, I'm going to drop their names and what they do, and then I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and give a little bit on what they do, and then we'll take the conversation from there. I'm thinking what we'll do is have an organic conversation about what's out there in IP, where it's coming from. We have 3 really different and sort of divergent voices, and I'm going to try and talk as little as possible. So to my immediate left is Plato Fountidakis. I don't know how close I got, but...
amazing name.
He is the CEO and co-founder of Fast Motion Studios and Fast Motion Media Group in Toronto. To his left is Valerie Connelly from TheBis.Ca. Which is a new, correct me if I'm wrong, but a new startup around the cannabis culture. And then to her left is Kevin Barton from SnackableTV with Bell, also from Toronto?
Yes.
Okay, all 3. I'm the only local here. So why don't we come back to you, Plato, and just give us the 30-second spiel on who you are and what you do and where your IP comes from, and we'll just walk down the road.
Okay, great. This is on, right? Basically, I EP and produce original content out of Toronto, so scripted programming and lifestyle programming. We are now getting into more of the short-form programming, doing some web series, some new IP. Traditionally, we get original writers to come up with concepts and ideas, but now we're also venturing into a little bit more organic, social, communal ideas, touching on different aspects from a parkour sort of society to maybe gamers and so forth. So it'll be coming out this year.
Awesome.
Right. Valerie?
I've produced and developed shows for all the major broadcasters in Canada. And my latest project, I think, kind of inspired by sort of the changes in 2016 thanks to our Heritage Minister and Canadian content. And I've always been sort of attracted to the digital space and the liberties that you can take with it. And so just today we launched a digital platform that is all cannabis-inspired content. We had sort of unprecedented access to some of the biggest leaders in Canada that are really driving that space. And so the traditional broadcasters are a little apprehensive right now about stepping in and touching on that programming. So I decided to take the liberty of launching a digital platform to provide access to all Canadians about this monumental time that's happening. And so we launched TheBis.Ca just today, 4/20.
Great.
Congrats.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Astrid, my friend Astrid's actually going to hand out some cards later, so you guys all have, so you can check out our first series.
Everyone go there tonight and have a look.
I thought they were handing out weed, but I guess not.
Well, yeah.
All right.
For our good friends.
There we go. Kevin Barton, I started off head of urban music marketing for Universal Music. Moved from there into the telecom space before moving from head of marketing at B-Mobile at Cable & Wireless to film side, and now I currently actually help develop the IP for Snackable Television and worked with Bell now to develop that particular IP.
Awesome. So Kevin, correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like we have two creators of content and through that maybe searchers for IP, and then you're almost like a broadcaster in the web space. Is that a fair kind of explanation?
Yeah, and it is an exact fair explanation of it, but once again, it started as my own IP, which I think is really important. People understand it was an idea that I developed, and upon knowing Randy and working with him at Universal Music for a number of years, went in to discuss his new role at Bell Media as president, and in talking about it, saw that there was an opportunity to move something into a space that Bell didn't have, and it was started with solving a problem as a filmmaker myself, and understanding that getting large-scale budgets of $4 or $5 million might be a problem. So how do I solve that? So I solve it by creating a platform that lowers the bar, where you can bring in shorter bits of content that they could look at growing into larger scale IPs.
Awesome. And how does Bell monetize that? Are they running ads in front of it?
At this particular moment, it is a freemium model. It will go to an ad-based service. But at the same time, because it's short form, and in its essence, I believe that the space is still pretty young, we are looking at different ways, and I believe to monetize it outside of just running ads. And just like she had mentioned, one of them that I was in a conversation today is big people are talking about the space in the sense of how do you build content to commerce-based projects where the content is driving the commerce in itself. So there's a lot of discussions in and around that in different ways now to create IPs to drive commerce that will alleviate having to push a large-scale number of ads in front of all of these particular projects.
Cool. Now, Valerie, it strikes me that you're almost coming at it from the opposite side. So instead of coming at it from the operational side, you're coming at it by looking at a huge cultural trend. And as you referenced earlier, it's almost like the day that Prohibition ends, quite literally, and then kind of deriving your IP out of that almost sort of communal experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a shift for me, but it's also kind of still in my same wheelhouse. Any concept that I've ever come up with was always, I'm a big believer, you can have the best idea in the world, but if nobody wants to watch it, kind of who gives a shit, right? Like, you can have the best IP, but if it's not sellable, then kind of who cares? And so, any concepts that I would take into a broadcaster and would be pitching and trying to get financing from would always be something that there is a demand for from an audience, right? So this is kind of following that same model. There's nothing else in this space, and my timing's really great, and I'm just financing it differently. Like, I'm sort of, because of what happened in 2016, with the big Chorus acquisition and CanCon changes, they're just traditional television. They just weren't buying content. And so I was like, well, really the money comes from brands, and so why not just go directly to brands and ask them for money? And so that's sort of how I'm financing and trying to monetize sort of my new platform. It's still very new, and I'm just really curious about how it's going to evolve.
Awesome. Well, and this is slightly off topic, but I'm going to ask because I'm curious.
Yeah.
Is if you don't mind and don't give away any secrets, but like what are the nuts and bolts of monetizing it through that kind of branding model? Because I know that gets discussed a lot, but it's really interesting to hear about it in execution. Yeah,
I think because of what my content is, I'm hitting a lot of different roadblocks that you wouldn't normally hit. Like, we launched today, and we tried to do boosts on social media, like on Facebook and Instagram, and they were immediately like, no, you have the word cannabis, and we can't talk about that. And so, and then just, Bill C-45, which is the cannabis bill and legalization, it's very broad, and so it's really challenging to provide content that is not seen as promoting. And so I think my specific content is a bit of a different beast than what other people are. And so I'm just really focusing on brand integration. Like, that's really, I can't advertise on my website. I can't, none of that can happen as of today. That could very well change in the near future. But, I think, taking it, my strategy too is going to be obviously taking it to live events and, getting off digital platforms and connecting with people in real life. It's great to connect on a digital platform, but able to transition that into some real life events too would be sort of a bit of a goal, and try to monetize it that way too.
Sure, and it strikes me that whole sort of the cannabis culture has a built-in community to it that is obviously huge and thriving, and it's almost like, if I hear what you're saying correctly, you have to kind of delicately dance around what people are already doing. You can, as you said, you can go out in the street and people will hand you dope, right? But
yeah,
you can't
and the goal
necessarily...
for us is, but the goal for this IP specifically is really to welcome in new users, right? And people that are just curious about what's happening. Like, that's how I got sucked in. Like, I'm not a big stoner. I'm not anti-cannabis, but It's not part of my daily life. But like, it's so fascinating what is happening in our country and so much money that's coming into it, and just this big change, and just nobody's talking about it.
Sure. Great. So Plato, it seems to me that one of the things that's interesting about your operation is you come from the traditional sort of live action, like you made a conventional TV show, and Lost Girls was sort of fits the old model. What sort of took you down the path into more short form content?
I think Valerie kind of touched on a little bit. The landscape has changed quite a bit with distribution models. So you're not getting the same licensing deals, distribution deals like you had in the past. So you have to sort of recreate the way you're going to monetize. In short format is a new appetite, new way that the audiences these days are wanting to sort of go after, content, right? And specific to their niche. There's snowboarders that want to see their stuff, campers that want to see their stuff. So there's a lot of different ways to sort of gain that sort of knowledge base of what people are asking and demanding out there, and come up with just original and creative content. Right. And I think that's what we started doing. Coming back from the martial art background on my side, we specifically do more action-oriented, sort of content-driven, at the moment. And that's what we have, created, which will be coming out. I can't talk about some of them, but being a little bit lucid. But we do have one specific coming out with, it's called The Camp, dealing with campers. That's a perfect example, is bringing that model in that everyone that's gone to camp kind of can relate with it, either as a counselor or as a participant. So that's kind of a little different niche market right there.
Sure. And I think if I hear what everyone is saying correctly, for people in the audience that might be thinking about, okay, what should I be doing? It seems what is a unifying theme here is that you guys were all thinking about the market and about the sort of value of the IP as a commercial entity when you were coming up with your idea. So you're looking at it and going, I see the opportunity to speak to an audience here and to find a niche that, Valerie, it's almost shocking that no one else is in that space.
There's a couple, I actually know of two specifically digital platforms that are providing content in the cannabis space, but their approach is just very different than sort of, they're doing a very newsy, going for big investments, whereas I'm just a lot more grassroots and more entertainment content versus,
Sure. You are grassroots about your grassroots.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have so many puns. We could be here all day. But I think there'll be more to come for sure. But I think, I think just talking on IP in general, I think for me the key to really good IP is, and I was talking about this in my panel this morning, it's just about access. Having access to, I work strictly in unscripted, and having access to really compelling people and stories and what's happening in the world and being able to telling it from a really unique perspective. I think that sort of is the gold standard when I look for IP personally.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so I'll throw this out to everyone then, just to follow up on that question. You've already answered it, but maybe if the two gentlemen want to take a swing at it, is when you're looking for new IP, where do you go? How do you? That's the topic ostensibly of our panel, is unique or innovative sources of IP. So, where do you start? Where do you personally start?
I think it's because I come from a music background. I think it's a little bit different, because we talked about this just recently about the word A&R and what that used to mean for the music business, where we had guys that were sitting in offices and we would go out to clubs looking for artists, and we'd see something that we really liked and we'd nurture that talent and grow them into bigger brands. And now traditional A&Rs have all but disappeared, and now they expect these particular brands to walk through office doors already complete. How many YouTube hits do you have? How many followers Instagram? So that's kind of gone away, and now we're looking for these finished products. People try to look beyond the just idea right now. Working with a lot of startups, one of the things that had come up originally, or come up a lot of times, was they don't invest in ideas. They invest in teams. So when you're talking about larger scale projects, it's not necessarily that everyone has an idea. What they want to know is that the team that you've assembled has the means to bring that idea to fruition. So even in looking in film projects, sometimes someone might have a great idea, but I'm also looking at, okay, who's involved in that? Because if someone's going to give somebody a good set of money, they want to know that these people at least have some experience in handling money and completing projects. Just one other example that I was thinking of was Val, who was one of the founders from MTV. Me and him were talking one day, and he said that when MTV first had started, they knew they had an audience, and that MTV would have been the first short-form content player on the planet, as they kind of said. All of their content was under 3.5 minutes. But they did this programming cycle where they do hip-hop, and then they do rock and alternative and all this different kind of music, and they couldn't get the Nielsen numbers to show, because Nielsen only recorded every 30 minutes. And therefore, their ratings were really low, but they knew people were watching. So he said it wasn't until they changed their programming and started doing rock for half hour and then hip-hop for half hour did they see the spike in their Nielsen ratings. So sometimes it's really just about fine-tuning the IP. Once you know you have a great idea, but you might have to fine-tune it a few times to actually figure out where the monetization of that idea lies. So those are some of the things that I look at. When you see an idea, sometimes you might like, well, that's a good idea, but maybe if we twist and change that slightly, the frequency, then it becomes a valuable or a viable product to make money off of. So.
Do you think that operating in the web gives you additional flexibility? So, for instance, if you're making a TV show or a feature film, once the train is on the tracks, like, man, I've changed in midstream. It's an ugly process, right? And it usually leads to disaster. But it strikes me that really what you're talking about is being able to iterate and being able to sort of modify on the fly. And intuitively, you would think that digital would be more open to that, and short form would be more open to that because, hey, we did a 5-minute one, and we think it might be better this way. Let's try the next one a different way.
Sorry, just the two things, quickly interject on that. In developing the platform for Snackable, the idea to the approach was it wasn't about short-form content. It was about solving a problem. And the problem we started with was time. And the time was a commitment issue for people with short form. They were watching short form because they would want to commit to doing a half hour sometimes, 15, 10, 3 minutes, whatever the case was. But in developing it, we started first with understanding people's behavior in digital and building a platform that we felt was conducive for people to watch digital and how they kind of came through the front door and how they would access the content. It took us 99 iterations to get to the one that we currently see that right now is developing an app. We tried it, we tested it, we A and B tested it, we kept trying it, but it's a work in progress still because things continue to change in this landscape. So for us, it's always changing. I know in feature film and some of the Plato stuff, it's much more difficult. So I think I'd really like the freedom of being able to be like, okay, it's not working, let's try this show, let's try this particular IP, let's try this level of engagement, let's kind of tweak it and use analytics to drive it.
Yeah, I was going to expand on that. He touched on it, but what's interesting is because the landscape has changed, it's from the traditional aspect, you have a lot of influencers that are telling you from the networks and broadcasters, this is the way to go around it. You can only go this format and do it the way we're telling you from a creative standpoint. But I think you're a lot more flexible and lenient, kind of like what you mentioned from a creative perspective, allowing the web to give you the feedback, sometimes almost instantaneously, of what your audience is actually wanting to watch and not wanting to watch. So sometimes it can be a little quicker than the traditional format. And I think people nowadays just need to be more resourceful. If they know from their background that I have experience or my team has experience, say, in the medical industry, let's come up with a concept dealing with that because that's what we can attach to, like doctors, nursing experiences, whatever it might be. If you're dealing with automotive, you can deal with like doing car stunts or whatever it might be. But you come up with these ideas that actually you can nurture very strongly on your own, independently, and expand and explore it very easily on the landscape, like from the web. Sure.
Now, what's the sort of financial model for you? How are you taking that IP and then sort of...
Monetizing is a different story. That can be a little bit complicated. And there's a lot of different test models for that, because I know you're going to start touching on that. You somewhat still deal with some of the old school traditional licensing agreements to some degree. The way I've sort of come across to sort of fix that is dealing with a chapter mentality of the 5-minute, 10-minute appetite, whereas I'm building up those chapters and it can be a half an hour segment to an episodic. So hence you got 7 episodes, but you got X amount of chapters that you can also infuse into the mobile units or the web series. So there's different little models that can work sometimes and not strongly with others because the narrative is different. So it all depends on the creative.
Sure. So, Valerie, when you're trying to, I presume that you sort of saw cannabis as a potential subject or as a potential IP, and then, as you said, it was about the individuals that you could see within that based on your scripted thing. How do you, when you're trying to take it to the next level, are there sort of things that, are there guidelines or rules of thumb that you sort of take from your kind of old school?
What do you mean by next level? Like what?
Well, okay, so someone out there has an idea. Their idea is, let's say it's cooking, not cannabis.
Yes.
And they think that they have a good idea, but now you've actually got to build a show.
How do they bring it to fruition?
Like how do you cultivate your IP to make it something?
You need money. I think money is the first thing you need to get. Is you need to finance it. You know, I have no problem asking people for money, and I have no problem taking money from sources. I think with my IP, I mean, I don't, just because I have conversations with some people sometimes, and they're like, well, I don't want my IP on this platform. I don't want it over there. And I'm really not that precious about it. I think, you know, getting your content out there is the success. And unless it's some crazy, weird, illegal, something funky platform, like just if somebody's interested, make a deal. So for me, I mean, obviously being in the industry for a couple decades and knowing people, I had the resources to and the credibility, right? Like I think that's a big part of it too. It's like, I mean, I can go to these people who have money and say, can you give me some? But they also know that, you know, I'm going to work with an A+ team to deliver quality content, right? So I think that, and I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, but I think something that's important for people to know when you're going, there's so much content out there these days. Like it's ridiculous, the amount of content. I think it's so key to be producing the highest quality content, and that's how you compete. Is people can do stuff on their iPhones, and I'm not slamming that by any means at all. But you know, if you want to monetize and better monetize, is like your actual product has to be really top notch, and that's a big focus for me. Is I have A+ teams that I work with to create the best content possible that I can then hopefully monetize and sell on other platforms and internationally. And
mm-hmm. Kevin, do you?
Yeah, just because I get asked that question, not just now, like the how-to question, how do I do it better? How do I get on? How do I kind of thing? And sitting on the music chair for a second, where we're putting out 125 urban albums a year alone. So I'm working with hundreds of artists, and you're watching these guys that are either at the height of their game or at the beginning of their game. And every single one has a different road to how they got there, and then different roads to which ones became successful and which ones don't. And I think that being part of a creative lifestyle is you just have to be as creative about, once you have the creative idea, how to nurture that idea. Because I don't think there really is, to be honest, an answer to that particular question, because 7 people will tell you 7 different ways about how they went about getting it to happen. But it is a creative journey, so you just have to really think, all right, how am I going to outdo the next person? How am I going to step up this particular game? So when I get asked that question, I'm always like, wow, I could tell you how Jay-Z did it, but I could tell you that Rihanna did it differently. I could tell you how Eminem did it, but I could tell you that Shaggy did it different than that as well. Like, everybody had a different approach to it, timing, luck, perseverance. They're all different factors in making things great, or great hits back then.
Yeah, I think what I hear you saying is that along with this sort of, I think when we talk about IP, people always think about, I'm going to go get a comic book, or I'm going to go get whatever that thing is. And that's the idea, and that's going to drive it. And what both of you guys are saying is that execution is key. And that execution, once you step up to the level of professional production, is the thing that everyone cares about, right? They'd rather have that IP over there done really well than this other one that may appear to have a little more sizzle in the pan, but isn't going to come together. And
just a word of wise, I am my IP. I am my greatest IP. And that's kind of the way that I approach everything. Like, that's where it really starts. Like, I am the person. If I'm selling something, I'm selling just as much myself, and I am the product. So you have to be your best advocate, and your biggest IP should be you. And that's when the investment starts.
I agree with that 1,000%. I think that's really well said. Yeah.
We all jump to the same thing.
Yes, we're amazing.
I agree with that. You need tenacity, drive. But one thing that definitely need with IP is a great marketing plan and finance strategy. I mean, people just assume they're going to have a great IP and it's just going to happen. So if it's private equity or public funding or crowdfunding, whatever it might be, have something behind you as well. It could be your credit card, but
even if you don't, I was just going to say, like, I don't want to discourage people. I'm just thinking back what I just said about money, which helps. But, I mean, having a proof of concept, I think, is a good first step. Like, even if you can't afford, a crew or a team, like, if you can go out and just create some sort of proof of concept. And then partnerships. Like, I'm a big fan of collaborations and partnering with people. Like, I think I help you, you help me. Like, we all are in this together. And I feel like that's a big step for success. So, if I didn't have the experience I had and I had this idea, that's where I would start. Is I would do something where I at least have a proof of concept, even if it's just on my phone, and then
iPhone?
yeah, and then my flip phone, and then look at partnerships. Like, who can I connect with? Who is a producer I know who can maybe connect me with the right people? And that's, I think, where I would kind of, if I was starting very fresh, that's what I would.
Yeah, building a strong team. That's exactly.
Team is big.
Yeah.
Well, and so Plato, like following on from that, something that it seemed you were saying is that you're sort of looking around for performers, in this case maybe stunt performers or campers or snowboarders or whatever, who then, if I understand it correctly, are almost like the stars of their own show to some degree.
We are. One thing we didn't touch on is social media plays a big factor. So some of that star power could be influencers.
No question.
That have great followings. So they might not be the best talent, but they have already an audience that exists that you can build something around it. I still believe that you need some great writing. A good narrative always helps. You can't just have, I got a great idea, and we pull it off. Execution's terrible because the narrative's not there. So again, it is an entertainment factor, so we need to throw that in there. I think a lot of people forget about that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you think that... no, that question went right out of my head.
That was a good question.
That was solid. That was right there. When you're sort of looking to assemble a team, are you going with people that are already established in the industry? Are you looking out there to find
definitely
new voices?
either writers that we've worked in the past or up and coming writers? So we're always looking at great creative scripts. Right. There's a lot of nice young talent out there. Not everyone has to be unionized either, because I know a lot of people think it's all union people. But definitely, that we always look for the right team, building them. Great DPs, cinematographers, directors, up and coming. Some great talent. I mean, I'll speak only for Toronto because I tend to work mainly in Toronto region, even though we deal with a lot of international from our service aspect, because we do a lot of servicing in our studio as well. So, but yeah, great directors and
I'm on the opposite
team.
of that spectrum. I look at my friends. and I don't say that,
which is true too.
I don't
a
want
lot
to
of
be in
our
a very
friends are great
rude
creative
way,
people.
because I always say this to people that are coming out of film school and that are starting off. The people that I traditionally have worked with now are people that came up the ranks with me. I didn't look to people that were well established in the game when I first started and ask them for help. I worked with people that were around me and resources of people that are all now in positions that have honed their craft, and I can trust them, and I know the kind of work that they do and can deliver. So it's not to say that you don't let anybody on, but I think that the greatest resource for people that are starting are generally the people that are around them. And those are the relationships that you nurture through the years that become powerful relationships.
Yeah, trust factor.
Yeah, trust is big for me. So it's not like I would turn over a very large-scale project to someone I had no idea that I've spoke to a few times. I don't think it would happen for me personally. I'm going to look for people that I actually know can do that and do it well. So
yeah, it has to be conducive, and a lot of times it collapses. There has been many projects that collapse. I mean, you think you're building the right team, and you realize in the middle of some of the production meetings that it's just not going to work. Yeah. It's not cohesive enough.
Yeah, I think we've all been there, and it's never a very good feeling.
I had a friend say to me once, sometimes the brightest light comes from a burning bridge. And I was like, that's a little profound. I'm like, keep that in my back pocket.
When you guys think about new IP and new things, where do you think the most sort of innovative sources are going to be in the future? Is it going to be someone with a social media profile? Is it going to be a cultural sort of movement? Like if you were trolling for your next thing, not the thing you're doing now, like where would you start?
Go ahead.
For me personally, just because it's my passion, why I do what I do, is I like real people and real stories. And so that is always sort of a source that I gravitate to. And so I get around, right? Like I literally physically get around and go to a lot of different things and do a lot of, have a lot of different interests. And, there's no, I used to read Maclean's and Reader's Digest and, do the newspaper every day looking for different IPs or things that would be inspiring me for ideas. And I find really it's just my network of people that I know. Like I wouldn't even, I don't really gravitate toward, I gravitate towards, YouTube and influencers from a marketing perspective. But for me, it's not an IP perspective where I'm going to develop something with those people. I like the idea of finding something that nobody else knows about and like this secret something and bringing that to light. That's what drives me on stuff.
It's almost like you're saying humanity. You're looking at
people.
Yeah, you're looking at people.
And dogs. I like dogs.
I agree with her on that. I like to expand on that. I think for me, looking in the future is also dealing with a lot of the new technologies coming out there. Like VR is one touching on it, holographic imagery. There's a lot of different ways of telling a narrative and more in depth, but definitely about humanity. I mean, touching on cultures, imagining being able to see what's going on in Syria, for example, in a whole different perspective where no one else has been through there, seeing exactly the destroyed, environments and so forth. I mean, that's touching, compelling. So you can't really do that with a lot of other medias at the moment, but VR is really intending to get you looking around and maybe touching sensory. There's a lot of new software and hardware coming out that's going to make things a little bit more realistic.
Sure.
From a creative standpoint as well, aside from just web.
Where I look for creative inspiration, I'm getting in trouble for this one. It definitely comes, for me, it's always a grassroots movement. Like, I don't find that working inside of large multinational corporations are a harvest for great new ideas. You know what I mean? It always comes from someone out in the street, from the music side when you work there. Like, if you are looking for the next great artist, it's going to come from some DJ, you're going to find it in some club. You're not going to find it with a group of executives sitting around in a room being like, hey, you know what? It's never coming from there. So I'm always looking for what's coming next creatively from think tanks, from people in this room. That's where I always hear the greatest ideas, is once again, very grassroots, being in touch with people to be like, whoa, did you hear about this? And all of a sudden, someone picks up on it, finances it, and it becomes this great thing. But yeah, it's not going to come from a tower. That's
actually something that I have kind of concerns around, like just how technology has been integrated into our society. And, I used to, this company I worked for in Toronto, I used to always take interns. I'm a big fan of, helping people out when they start out. And they would be terrified of making phone calls. They'd be like, oh, can I send an email? I'm like, no, you have to talk to this person. And I would mandate 5 phone calls a day. And they would have such anxiety over time. And I'm like, for me, like my biggest gift is like my gift. I give good phone. Like that has always been something that I've been really good at, is talking to people and, really quickly get their stories and learn about other people.
One of my biggest pet peeves. I mean, I'm sitting down with these people, coordinators, and they're like, yeah, I've emailed this person. I'm like, you realize their office is just down the hall. You know what I mean? Like, go and talk to them. You're sitting here asking me that you can't get the answer. Just go over there. But they're not there. Then go back.
Yeah, and it's that basic. Like those, honestly, it's just simple conversations where you find great ideas.
Texting in the same room.
Yeah,
that's always interesting.
It strikes me that what each of you said in a different sort of way was authenticity. Right, that finding, whether it's artists on the street or some kind of human experience that you're tapping into, whatever your IP is, it strikes me that authenticity is almost the sort of root of that. And I think you're right; that never comes out of a corporate boardroom, right? Like that's where authenticity goes to die usually.
I've been sitting in some meetings where I'm just like, really? That's not really the greatest idea, and I don't know who came up with that particular one. Where it's just kind of like you actually thought that was a good idea. I'll give you an example. Here's an example. I was doing consulting for an
unknown place.
I was doing consulting, I'll say, for an unknown chicken wing company in the United States. And they were throwing a launch party in New York. I was in after the fact. And they thought that it would be, there was a particular rapper who was there, who had bought a large number of chains of this particular chicken joint. And they thought it would be a good idea to hand out as promo items gold chains with chicken wings on them. So this particular rapper walks in and they try and hand him this fake gold chain with a chicken wing on it. And I was like, who thought that through? Who was in the room and said that, you know what, let's give Rick Ross a gold chain with a chicken wing as he walks through the door of this particular party? And these are the kind of ideas that come out of corporate boardrooms where you're just like, yeah, no, guys, stay out of that one.
Sure.
Yeah.
So for people out there who are thinking of how they develop their own IP, like it's a sort of amorphous thing, authenticity, right? It's like you know it when you see it. But like, does anyone have any thoughts on how do you track that down? Like,
Hard to tap in. I think it's just a rawness. Sometimes you just see the raw talent.
Your gut.
Yeah, your gut instincts.
But not everybody shares your gut. Like, I had an experience recently where my gut was not shared. Like, I had this talent that I thought were amazing. And I took them into HGTV, and they hated them. Like, literally, like it was like, whoa, why would they? Like, it was nasty. Like, I have never had them hate on people so much. And I was like, oh, because I was like so excited. I'm like, I love these guys are great. They're so relatable and they're authentic and they're just so genuine. And they're like, hate them. And I'm like,
Thick
that's fair.
skin. I mean, and similarly, like first for me, you got to believe it more than I do. Like if I don't believe that you believe it, there's a wavering in your voice, and I know I'm never going to you got to live, eat, breathe, and shit that stuff for me to believe it, right? That's number one. But it's the same way I am about my ideas, and I get turned down, shot down all the time.
Yeah.
As a real rule, when I thought the idea of Snackable through, I was sitting with another large-scale investor, had millions of dollars. And I was sitting in a room with him, and he sat there telling me all the reasons that this idea would not work. And he wanted to do the idea with me, but he said, we're going to change this, we're going to change this, we're going to change this. And I sat there quietly. I listened to him, and then I just said, thank you very much. I excused myself and just told the other person, I don't think I'm going to do this with him. I'm going to walk it out the door, and I'm going to walk it into Bell Media on my own. And I did, and it sold.
Yeah.
And that's just literally me being like, gut check. I'm just like, you know what? I honestly do not, you might have a lot of money and resources, but I don't believe that your way to do it is right, and I'm just going to try and do it on my own.
Yeah.
it strikes me that that's a kind of universal experience in the creative industries, which is somehow trying to balance your gut instinct and your faith in your own thing with still being open to outside voices, which might be smarter than you, might have a better idea. It sounds like that guy wanted to take you in completely the wrong direction, but someone else who came in might have had a really good idea. So when you're developing your IP, how do you balance out that, or is it all just gut?
I've been fired from jobs because I wanted to pursue a concept. It was a friendly firing, and was able to. They just didn't believe it, and I said, "Listen." And I kind of went behind my boss's back and kind of pitched it anyways. I was right, you know. Like there was an appetite for it, and it was a very amicable. We still tried to work together on the project afterwards, but you know, sometimes I don't necessarily recommend that. Like that's. You know, I was certainly in a place in my career where I was kind of ready to be on my own, so I think like, it just sort of made sense, and that's why I was that bold. But you know, it's tough. Like you know, there's a certain level of tenacity you need to have with your projects because you do get a lot of no's. Majority of the time, people say no, and but you know, if you do believe passionately about something, like I have projects. Like I have a project I've been sitting on for like a good 2 years now. I'm just waiting for sort of that right moment, and you know, timing is really key, and I'm not ready to give up on it yet, you know. So,
and that walking out of the room is because younger version of me would have gone down that road.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And that's only from experience of having, you know, my ideas twisted and taken in other directions, and I didn't want to go with, and I'd learned my lesson time and time again just to be like, no. So a more mature me can be like, no, that's okay, I'll pass.
And your life experience would have told you, like for me, that was a bit of life experience. It was like, I think, yeah, right? Like I'll bet on me on this one. Yeah.
I think everyone has their own approach.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just like some people are great salesmen, others aren't. You build it with experience, but sometimes some are more natural about it than others. But yeah, tenacity and drive is the key thing for anything. I mean, otherwise you wouldn't be engaged in anything, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Each of you in your own way has sort of done something that is quite innovative, which is, I guess, how this panel came together. Where do you think other people, the audience members, anyone else who's watching this online, if they are looking for something, I mean, the whole idea behind innovative IP is that their ideas can be fundamentally different than yours, right, and mine and anybody else's. That's what makes it innovative. Like, where should they be starting? Is it just with passion? Is it with a sense of talent? Is it with, hey, there's a community here? Like, how do I take my idea that's way the hell off in left field and somehow begin the process of validating it?
For me, I think that what I've learned over the particular years is there's an idea and then there's a strategy. Like just having the idea is one thing, but having an idea of how that idea is either going to become to fruition or to be a monetizable entity takes some work. And that's a big part for me. It's just kind of like, all right, cool, I have something great, but how am I going to get it from A to B? And I'd like to see a really well thought out plan where you've kicked the tires, you've really looked at it from a few different ways, and then someone else may be able to come to it and be like, yeah, well, have you thought of it this way? But strategy is a big part for me. I mean, you have an idea, strategy is the number 2 for me.
Yeah, I think my very first step is who's going to care. It's like, oh my God, these halibut fishermen off the coast of Vancouver are just this wild. And I'm like, well, who's going to care about that? And that's, I think, sort of where I tend to start, and then it kind of develops from there. But there's always strategy involved. Like, I think you're naive to think that there shouldn't be a strategy involved and that you can just willy-nilly it. I think, we talk about being grassroots and stuff, but there's still a lot of planning and thought behind any initial IP concept that might come up. It's like, how can I integrate brands? How can I monetize it? Is there ancillary products that can come from it? Like you need to have a real 360 idea around what that initial IP is, because they're going to ask you, like whoever you go to get money from to finance, they're going to know how how you're going to recoup it or how it's going to plan out. And so I agree with you 100%. Strategy for sure.
I agree. It's based on your audience demographic. Same thing. I mean, experience and experience meaning that you need to put together the right teams and the strategy and the marketing and everything all at once. But obviously, you got to focus out on your audience. Who is it? Sure. Without that, you're kind of lost.
Absolutely. So would you say then that it's more important to build a strategy around who your audience is or what your creative is, like what the narrative of story is, or is it really about the money? Is it about...
I think it's cyclical. Sorry, I didn't let you finish,
no, that's
but
fine.
I think it's cyclical. It's probably all of that together, because as you're going, it's not the old school linear approach, whereas I got my finance, right, and part of my development, and you approach it, and you're going to go through the development of the script and getting the talent and the cast, distribution and broadcast. Right now, it's all cyclical. So you start with a great idea where your audience is. Okay, is there an audience for this idea? If there isn't an audience for that idea, move on, pick another idea. I mean, I'm sure everyone in this room has many different ideas, and they're passionate about most of them. Obviously, you have to have a passion for what the idea is, and then that you want to show it to the audience you're thinking of showing it to. And then when you see all that, then you start cyclically start growing with it and saying, okay, I got a little bit of finance. Okay, I can market it with social. I can do this. I can do that. Maybe get a license deal from these guys, some brand tie-in, throw in the sneakers, do whatever it is. And, oh, wow, look, I got a great piece of content that everyone wants to see.
I think it really depends on who, like, defining audience. Like, for me, if I'm pitching to a broadcaster and that's how I'm financing it, my audience isn't the Canadian audience. My audience is that broadcaster and that specific person in that room, right? Like, I'm looking at them and knowing sort of what their tastes are, and then also thinking what's trending, what they're looking for. And so that becomes my very small audience when I'm pitching content or IP to a network trying to finance something that way. With this, my new project, just going straight digital, it's been really actually kind of refreshing, where I can look at what I view as what's the demand with the public, right? And tailoring my content in that respect, right? Where it's much more of a connection with the real people versus just a room full of people.
I'd say I don't know. And I only say that because I can tell you the exact plan that worked last year probably won't work this year. You know what I mean? Like, the market is changing at such a rate, and as we say, with digital and technology really changing that landscape, as much as I would have a great plan for you today, I don't think it may work next week, or, you know what I mean? If we take, and I keep using music as examples because we watched an industry that went through such an influx of change in such a quick pace, and now we're seeing some of those same things happen on the digital side as far as programming goes, where someone was... I know a record label that Drake had gone to earlier in his career, and they asked the question, are you really upset at the fact that you hadn't signed them or done work with them? And the reality was no, because if he had gone that route, he wouldn't be Drake. And for him to meet someone who put him on to Lil Wayne, who co-signed him in the United States, for a guy who was on Degrassi and played somebody who was in a wheelchair. Like, you can't document a good idea like that and think that it would be successful again this time around. So, you know what I mean? Every time it's going to have a different curve. But, we talked about the tenacity of it. It's just kind of like, you should have a good plan, but you have to be adaptable to knowing when that plan is fucking up and just try to go at it from a different way.
Timing is definitely so it's there always.
I mean, you got to know, like I was saying this morning in my panel too, like your IP is not precious. Like it will evolve and it will turn into something you never, if you asked me even a year ago if I'd be launching this digital platform doing original cannabis content, I'd be like, are you fucking crazy? Like I had no, like, and it
Maybe
really
you were.
just, and then it just said, and then I'm just like, oh, I'm going to do this now. So the flexibility and being willing to evolve, I think, is what will keep you paying your bills, right? Like, it's just.
It seems to me what you're saying is it's like staying true to your core values, whether that's authenticity, creativity, looking for that new act, whatever that is, and then responding to the circumstances that are changing around you. Because I agree, I think the landscape for most of our businesses are changing so fast that you really don't know what the viable business model is going to be 6 months from now. And you're going to miss it a whole bunch of times. And then one time you're going to be the right guy in the right place. And that's going to be the thing that takes you to the next level. We've sort of done so far, and I guess this will be our last question. We'll open it up for questions. But everything we've talked about is sort of bottom up. Like, what are the innovative IPs, and then where do we take them? Let's end with thinking from top down. Do you see innovative technologies? You hit on it a little bit, Plato, but that are out there that might kind of create new opportunities? I mean, beyond it's WebFest, right? So we're on digital, and we're short form content. That in and of itself, we're already into a pretty innovative space. But what else is out there that might be an interesting fit going forward, even if at this point it's purely speculative?
I think the VR realm definitely has, from a narrative perspective, like I mentioned, even from an educational academic side as well, where you can make learning actually fun. Yeah, because we're lacking that a lot in the STEM process and STEAM, sciences, technology, entertainment, and mathematics, the whole thing. Yes and no. I agree with you, but I think we touched on it in the panel yesterday with you. A little bit. No. With the talk. Well, in Ontario, we deal with a lot of different universities, and we deal with workshops independently with our workshops in our studio, and we're actually changing the way they're thinking, including through physics, practical and online. Like we're dealing with it in production perspective, how to use certain mathematical equations of dealing with sets and how we're doing rigging aspects and weight variances and so forth. I think there's a way around it where people don't think, oh my God, I'm going to sit inside a classroom and hear some teacher doing this. I mean, it can become very entertaining. So you put the scope in a 3D realm, for instance. That's right. And to them, it's an interpretation that I'm not sitting in the classroom anymore, putting this VR set on, and I'm being taught, like, even from home. It's pretty interesting. It's starting to happen already in a lot of different countries. I think we're just behind the times a little bit here. I don't know if it's the unions or what it deals with from a perspective for teachers. I have a lot of academic friends, so I don't want to talk too much about that. But yeah, everyone has a lot of.
Yeah.
Go ahead, guys.
I'm like education by default. Like I love entertainment. If there's, I had a bit of an aha moment when I was in real screen, probably like 5 or 6 years ago. I was down in DC, and I was like, I had an afternoon before my flight was leaving, and I'm looking around, and I'm like, okay, well, what's in Washington? Where can I go? And I'm like, murder at 1600. Okay, 1600 Pennsylvania. That's where the White House is. And all my references were all from pop culture, like from movies and TV shows. I was like the Smithsonian, right? That Nicolas Cage movie, and that's how I knew how to. I tour guided myself for the afternoon based on sort of all my movie references. I think that has nothing to do with your question, but I think what I love seeing, and I think we're kind of going there a little bit more, is, for a while there, I think formats and concepts like original IPs were just getting so convoluted and so like overproduced and really dramatized. And I like seeing things just kind of getting back to sort of more grassroots. Like I loved when Gusto launched. I'm not a big Food Network person, but Food Network turned into just all these competitions, and it was all exciting and crazy and super cut fast. And then Gusto comes along, and it's like, we're going to do those dump and stir traditional food shows. And I'm like, yes, great. That programming, like when we talk about like that lifestyle programming that really put things on the back map, like with the Mike Holmes and like those simple concepts. And you see the biggest formats in the world right now that still get traction, like House Hunters. I mean, I don't know how many they've got like a gazillion episodes of that because people binge on it because it's easy television, it's easy content. And I see that there's maybe a bit more kind of going that way. I mean, it's a tougher sell because people always want to hook and all the rest of it. But I do think sort of at the core of it, if you produce those simple concepts really well, I think those are winners.
I think I'm going to go with, if you're asking what I see, just my personal opinion, it's probably a little bit of the commerce to content. And that would probably be the biggest change that I think I'm seeing right now, where the idea of traditional ways of making content are becoming much more accessible, but incorporating them digitally into those particular projects. Where, like she said, if television is driven by brands are becoming more and more, people talk about branded content, but there are now more ways to actually not just, say, throw a car in there, but work these particular products through a digital experience, as we see with the Instagram ads that are becoming a lot more effective with people, with targeting, and people are purchasing in-app. So I think that we're just seeing a lot of changes in the ways that brands are interacting with the particular content and ways that they're figuring out to monetize that direct-to-consumer relationship between the content and the actual purchase cycles.
Great. Well, why don't we open it up for questions here? I think we have about 10 minutes, so I'll ask people to kind of keep them short so we can get as many as we can.
I see a lot of the kind of big telecom players, cable networks and stuff moving into web, digital, and a lot of the funders, the avenue's starting to look almost like it looked like in television, like the requirements and things like that. You have to start connecting with bigger production companies to get things made. Is television just moving to the web? Are they just going to take over the small space? Or is there a lot of room for just, like is it still the Wild West, or is it the big guys just gobbling everything up?
Anyone want to?
I still, and people might chuckle at this, I still think traditional television is strong. When you look at where people are spending their ad dollars, like their biggest spend, yes, they're doing all their ads on social media and stuff, but their biggest spends are still traditional television. So I think that in order for these, if you're talking about the networks themselves, yeah, of course they're getting in the digital game, right? Like they have to, CBC and their OTT, and you're talking about with Bell Media, like, yeah, they have to be diverse in that way. Like you can't just be one traditional model. You need to, like we all talk about is evolving. But I think that it's still accessible. Like I think that the digital space, like you can get in and get meetings and talk to people, on those platforms. Like I think that there's still accessibility. It's not just for like the big producers that they want to talk to.
For now, but like,
will that change? We'll get in now and then just have that relationship, right? Like leverage the time, So yeah, could it change? Yeah, I don't know. Probably.
I don't know if they're any different. Meaning that, Randy, the president, that says like, we all play in the digital space now. And I don't believe that television and digital are really two separate things anymore. They're the same thing. They're just one you're watching on a television and one you might be watching on a phone or a laptop, but it's all the same exact space now. We monetize them differently. Like you say, captive audiences through television, but I don't think that right now there's any differentiation between what digital is anymore. Like it used to be, the web was over here and television was over here. Now it's just one big synonymous system that runs together. So we just make budgets and things differently for different platforms because you can monetize them differently, but there's really not a distinction between digital and television anymore.
Anyone else?
I think you guys are wonderful, and you've given out a lot of wonderful information about how we can, and of course answering that question of how do we go out and get our own IP and all that stuff. So can you talk about how, whether or not you guys are willing to talk to us about how we can talk to you guys about?
From my standpoint, I'm always open to review what you have from an original content. We always look at new people like all the time, but we're pretty straightforward that if we feel it's not there, we'll tell you right away. Does that helps.
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000. I mean, I'm always happy to talk to people. I still remember where I was 18 years ago, and having those opportunities and people. I remember the head of MTV when MTV first came to Toronto, and he took a meeting with me and dropped F-bombs the entire time, and I was like, I was such a noob, and I was like, but I still remember people who took the time, and I always will make the time for people as well. It might not be always, a lot of time, depending on the schedule, but I will always make the effort to read submissions and give whatever feedback I can.
Yeah. I love great ideas. I love, listening to them and hearing them. May not be able to help, but at least, I'm open to telling you exactly, how I think you might benefit you in some way, knowing that piece of knowledge. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would just add to that we often are in the position of saying, like, this is great, but I don't know what I could personally do with it. But we always are willing to look at things and watch things. I think the trick is, approach in the most sort of polite and professional manner possible, and try to get your thing in a nice, easy to digest sort of piece, whatever that is, whether it's visual or written or whatever, so that we can actually look at it, and if that thing leaps out at us, we've had a chance, but we can sort of evaluate it quickly, because my desk, like everyone else's, probably has a pile of stuff on it, right?
A lot of times people say, let's have a meeting, and you come, they give you a simple idea. It's, okay, no treatment, nothing put together, no deck, no visuals, no proof of concept. So you just wasted your time, and you wasted my time. So it's basically what you're saying. Make sure you have everything together. If you're really passionate and you know what you want to drive out there, then show it. And proof is in the action of it, not just by talking.
And research. Research the individual, the opportunity of the person you're sitting in front, and you don't want to go in and pitch short-form content to a long-form player. And these things happen, you know what I mean? Do a little bit of research in regards to who you're speaking with, and obviously, so anytime you're approaching someone with an idea, make sure that if you do get that 5 or 10 minute shot, that you're ready to be like, hey, I thought this through, and here's the opportunity that I'm kind of thinking about. So, but otherwise, yeah, cool. Buy me a drink. It's usually one way.
I'm easy.
I know there's still a few more questions, but this room is going to be booked with another. The Adobe group is coming in shortly.
Sure.
So maybe the best way to keep the conversation going is just if you guys are willing to keep chatting with people.
Sure. But I want a question from that guy beside you. Yeah. What would you like, sir? Yeah.
What was it?
I actually forgot that.
All right. Well, listen, I want to really thank our panelists here. I think this was really interesting, and I hope you guys got something useful out of it.